Today, an FDA approval in small cell lung cancer, a partial clinical hold on multiple myeloma trials, in addition to the NCCN guidelines in colorectal cancer, a review period extended in myeloma, an application withdrawn in chemotherapy-induced neutropenia, and a European approval in lung cancer. Welcome to Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus. The FDA has approved the combination of atezolizumab with carboplatin and etoposide for the frontline treatment of patients with extensive stage small cell lung cancer. The decision is based on data from the Phase 3 Empower 133 study, in which the atezolizumab regimen led to a significant improvement in overall survival in this patient population. Results of the international trial showed that after a median follow-up of 13.9 months, the median OS in Empower 133 was 12.3 months in the atezolizumab arm, compared with 10.3 months in the carboplatin and etoposide and placebo arm, translating to a 30% reduction in the risk of death. Moreover, the median progression-free survival was 5.2 months in the atezolizumab arm versus 4.3 months in the placebo group. The 6-month PFS rate was higher with atezolizumab, and there was more than a doubling of the 12-month PFS rate versus placebo. The PD-L1 inhibitor also demonstrated superior 6-month and 12-month event-free survival rates. In multiple myeloma, the FDA placed a partial clinical hold on all trials examining venetoclax in multiple myeloma, which halted enrollment of new patients on the studies. The partial hold is based on safety findings from the ongoing Phase 3 Bellini trial, which showed a higher rate of patient deaths with venetoclax combined with bortezomib and dexamethasone versus placebo plus bortezomib and dexamethasone in patients with relapsed refractory disease. The rate of deaths was 21.1% in the venetoclax arm compared with 11.3% with placebo. Additionally, 6.7% compared with 1.0% of the deaths were treatment emergent in the two arms, respectively. 8 of the 13 treatment-emergent deaths in the venetoclax arm were attributed to infection. In the venetoclax arm, common causes of death other than disease progression were sepsis, pneumonia, and cardiac arrest. Although new enrollment on venetoclax myeloma trials is on hold, previously enrolled patients benefiting from the therapy may continue on the trials after consulting with their physicians. The NCCN has updated their clinical practice guidelines for the treatment of patients with colorectal cancer to include the regimen of encorafenib and binimetinib plus EGFR inhibition with either cetuximab or panitumumab as a Category 2A treatment recommendation for patients with BRAF V600E mutant metastatic colorectal cancer, following failure of 1 or 2 lines of therapy for metastatic disease. The NCCN based its recommendation on findings from the Beacon CRC trial, which showed that clinical outcomes with encorafenib, binimetinib, and cetuximab exceeded historic data in patients with BRAF V600E mutant metastatic CRC. Safety lead-in results from the trial, which enrolled 30 patients, showed an estimated median progression-free survival of 8.0 months and an estimated median overall survival of 15.3 months with a median duration of follow-up of 18.2 months. Moreover, the overall response rate was 48% by local assessment, with 3 patients achieving a complete response. In multiple myeloma, the FDA has added 3 months to the review period for a new drug application for selinexor for the treatment of patients with penta-refractory multiple myeloma. The new action date is now July 6, 2019. Cryofarm Therapeutics, the manufacturer of selinexor, submitted the application for an accelerated approval of selinexor for patients with myeloma who have received 3 or more prior lines of therapy and whose disease is refractory to at least 1 proteasome inhibitor, 1 immunomodulatory agent, and 1 CD38 targeted antibody, and to their most recent treatment. The original action date had been set for April 6, 2019. However, the FDA's Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee voted 8-5 against accelerated approval of the NDA in February, recommending delaying a decision on the drug until data becomes available from the Phase 3 Boston study. The FDA then requested further information from the company as an amendment to the NDA. The NDA is based on Part 2 of the Phase 2b STORM study, which showed that the combination of selinexor and dexamethasone was associated with a 26.2% overall response rate and an 8.6-month median overall survival. However, ODAC panel members cited concerns that the study was a single-arm combination trial and a prior Phase 1 study did not demonstrate strong single-agent activity. Moreover, there was significant toxicity with selinexor in the STORM trial, including treatment-emergent adverse events, serious adverse events, and treatment-emergent adverse events that resulted in patient deaths. Spectrum Pharmaceuticals has voluntarily withdrawn its biologics license application for eflapegrastim due to the company needing more time to complete the FDA's request for additional manufacturing-related information. The company stated that it plans to resubmit a BLA as soon as possible. In its request, the FDA did not mention concerns related to preclinical and clinical modules of the application or the requirement for further clinical trials. The application was submitted to the FDA in December 2018. Eflapegrastim is being evaluated as a novel agent for the management of chemotherapy-induced neutropenia in patients undergoing myelosuppressive chemotherapy. The application is based on findings from the Phase 3 Advance and Recover trials, which showed that eflapegrastim was non-inferior to pegfilgrastim in terms of absolute risk reduction of severe neutropenia in patients with early-stage breast cancer who experienced neutropenia due to myelosuppressive cytotoxic chemotherapy. In Advance, results show that the mean duration of severe neutropenia was 0.19 days for eflapegrastim and 0.34 days for pegfilgrastim, demonstrating non-inferiority. Additionally, non-inferiority of eflapegrastim for the duration of severe neutropenia was maintained across all 4 cycles. In Recover, results showed that the mean DSN was 0.31 days for eflapegrastim compared with 0.39 days for those who received pegfilgrastim, reaching the threshold for non-inferiority. Also in this study, non-inferiority of eflapegrastim for DSN was maintained across all 4 cycles. In non-small cell lung cancer, the European Commission has approved pembrolizumab in combination with carboplatin and either paclitaxel or nab-paclitaxel for the frontline treatment of patients with metastatic squamous disease. The approval is based on data from the Phase 3 KEYNOTE-407 trial, in which pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy demonstrated a 36% reduction in the risk of death versus chemotherapy alone, regardless of PD-L1 expression. Results also show that the combination of pembrolizumab with carboplatin and either paclitaxel or nab-paclitaxel significantly improved progression-free survival, leading to a 44% reduction in the risk of progression or death versus chemotherapy alone. Among those who received the pembrolizumab regimen, the ORR was 58% compared with 38% for patients who were treated with chemotherapy alone. Additionally, the median DOR was 7.7 months for patients on the pembrolizumab arm versus 4.8 months for those who received chemotherapy alone. The FDA approved first-line pembrolizumab for use in combination with carboplatin and either paclitaxel or nab-paclitaxel for the treatment of patients with metastatic squamous SCLC in October 2018. This week, we sat down with Dr. Stephen Treon of Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to discuss defining Waldenstroms macroglobulinemia.
Waldenstroms macroglobulinemia is a lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma. This is a mature B-cell lymphoma that also has the ability to differentiate into plasma cells. So you see a combination of mature B cells, lymphoplasmacytic cells, and plasma cells in the bone marrow of a patient with this disease. And these are all clonally related cells. They all carry the same mutation. In almost all patients, it's the MYD88 mutation. So you'll see it in all the different cell types that make up the disease. Among the lymphoplasmacytic lymphomas, it's the most common. Almost 95% of them actually secrete IgM. So even though the word Waldenstroms is almost synonymous with IgM lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma, it's important to keep in mind that there are other types of lymphoplasmacytic lymphomas, also IgG, IgA, and non-secreting as well. So the symptoms that patients present with Waldenstroms can vary a lot, and that's why it's important to keep the symptoms in mind. For the typical patient, anemia is very important to keep in mind. There are many mechanisms under which the anemia can be produced. It can be because the disease has spread in the bone marrow and it's inhibiting the red blood cell producing cells from having space to be able to grow out red blood cells. It can be because of hemolytic anemia, where the antibody associated with the Waldenstroms, the IgM, can bind to red blood cells and cause their destruction. But there's also this very interesting protein called hepcidin that's produced by both the tumor cells, but also in response to the interleukin-6 that's elevated in the bone marrow of patients with Waldenstrom. And hepcidin actually causes the loss of the ability to absorb iron by the gut. It also triggers whatever iron there is in the body to be sequestered in macrophages and monocytes. And so even if you stain a bone marrow to look for iron reserves. You'll think first off, well, there's iron there, but when you look very closely, that iron is in the monocytes and macrophages. And this can produce anemia. We see this a lot in patients with Waldenstroms. Sometimes we treat them with parenteral iron to overcome, that gut blockade, and this can actually help the patients, recover their hemoglobin very quickly. But it is an insidious mechanism by which patients can become anemic with Waldenstroms. Of course, there are other cytopenias too that can be produced, because of the expansion of the tumor cells in the bone marrow. It's also important to keep in mind that in almost half of all patients, it's not because of tumor bulk in the bone marrow that they're symptomatic. It's because of the IgM. IgM is a big bulky molecule. It weighs almost 1 million Daltons, and almost 80%, 90% of the IgM that you and I make stays in the bloodstream. And as a result, it can have an undue effect on the viscosity of the blood. If you have too high of an IgM level, your serum viscosity can be high, and you can have all kinds of symptoms. Usually retinal bleeding is what we see. Nosebleeds can occur. So this represents an oncological emergency when you see it. In as well, the IgM can act as an autoantibody. It can attack the peripheral nerves. They're usually anti-demyelinating or demyelinating antibodies and strip away the insulation around peripheral nerves. So almost a quarter of the patients that we now see come in because they have peripheral neuropathy, diagnosed by the neurologists. Those are the people that are diagnosing Waldenstroms now, because they routinely get serum protein electrophoresis as part of their workup of patients with peripheral neuropathy. We also tend to see cold agglutinemia. We can see cryoglobulinemia because of the IgM antibody, as presenting reasons for why these patients get referred to us. Adenopathy, at least at presentation, is very rare. We only see it in about 15% of all cases. At time of relapse, it can be much more. It can be about half of all patients. So it's not as frequent a reason why we would initiate therapy, but it's important to keep in mind. And the last thing also to keep in mind is that sometimes patients can present with Waldenstroms in the CNS, or they can relapse with Waldenstroms in the CNS. It used to be a very rare occurrence that we saw CNS Waldenstroms, which is referred to as Bing-Neill syndrome. But now we see 3 to 4, maybe even 5 cases a month in our clinic. It's becoming far more common, maybe because we're also getting better at diagnosing it, but also because it's a sanctuary site that we see a lot of late relapses occurring.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus.